Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English, IELTS Preparation. Today on Study English, we're going to practice using the words some and any. We'll also build up our vocabulary with some words about space and astronomy. But first, we're going to meet a planetary geologist who is fascinated by the planet Mars.
Mars is still a fascinating place. In the solar system, it's one of the most interesting places where there may be life apart from the Earth. We want there to be Martians with spaceships, ET, flying saucers, UFOs. We want all of these things. It's frozen to a depth of about 7 kilometres at the equator, maybe 20 kilometres at the pole caps. So there's a very thick frozen layer on Mars. The people who talk about water flowing to the surface of Mars underestimate how cold the planet is.
These scientists are hoping to find out about life on Mars. They're looking closely at the landscape and similar landscapes to try to understand everything they can about the planet. Listen to Dr. Hoffman talking about how the landscape of Mars was formed. Pay special attention to how he uses the words some and any.
Well, if we look at the picture here, cutting down through each of these gullies is a little black channel that's bulldozed its way through the snow, carved its way down and pushed the snow aside. Then each springtime, part of the snow collapses as it warms in the sun. It doesn't go through a liquid phase, it goes directly from solid to vapour, boils away and falls down the slope. And then you have this tumbling mass, a little avalanche of some snow, some rock, some sand, some dust, all churning up together. What I have shown with this work is that the structures that we see in Antarctica are a good place for life to be if there is life on Mars. It would be very primitive microbes. There wouldn't be any sort of multicellular life there.
In English, we use the words some and any to talk about how much or how many of something. Some and any are called determiners. They tell us something about the quantity or amount we're discussing. Listen to how Dr. Hoffman uses the word some.
It doesn't go through a liquid phase, it goes directly from solid to vapour, boils away and falls down the slope. And then you have this tumbling mass, a little avalanche of some snow, some rock, some sand, some dust, all churning up together.
He says some sand, some dust. The word some suggests an indefinite number or amount. It's not specific. We use it when it isn't important exactly how much or how many we mean. So you might say, I'd like some milk, or would you like some tea? Some is usually used in affirmative clauses like this. There are some letters for you at the post office. And we also use some in questions that expect a yes answer. For example, would you like some help? Yes, please. However, in negative constructions, any is more commonly used. Here's Dr. Hoffman talking about his work again. Listen to how he uses the word any.
What I have shown with this work is that the structures that we see in Antarctica are a good place for life to be if there is life on Mars. It would be very primitive microbes. There wouldn't be any sort of multicellular life there.
He says there wouldn't be any sort of multicellular life there. Any is common in negative sentences like this. For example, I don't have any money. So while some is most common in affirmative statements, any is most common in questions and in negative statements. After words with a negative meaning, we use any. Like this, you never have any money. There's hardly any food left in the fridge. When we use some to talk about a restricted or limited amount of something, we put the stress on the word some. For example, I like some Chinese food, but not spicy dishes. Or, I can eat prawns, but there is some shellfish I don't like. When the word any is stressed, this tells us that we're talking about an unrestricted quantity or unlimited choice. For example, you can borrow any book from the library. I don't like any films made in Hollywood. Astronomy is an important and popular science. Building your science vocabulary, especially your vocabulary about astronomy, can help you to appreciate science fiction films and books, as well as media stories about space exploration and new discoveries. But there are so many science words, where do we even start? It's important to learn how to organise new words logically and to develop strategies to help remember these new words. Listen to Dr. Hoffman talking about the possibility of life on Mars.
Mars is still a fascinating place. In the solar system, it's one of the most interesting places where there may be life apart from the Earth.
Dr. Hoffman talks about Mars, the solar system, and Earth. Of course, our planet is called Earth. There are 9 planets in our solar system. They are Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. It's important to learn all those names in English. Here's another clip. See if you can hear a word that is developed from one of the planet names.
We want there to be Martians with spaceships, ET, flying saucers, UFOs. We want all of these things.
He talks about Martians. We form the word Martians from the noun Mars. Martians are creatures from the planet Mars. We can extend our vocabulary about astronomy by looking outside our solar system to our galaxy, the Milky Way. We can also include words like comets, asteroids, stars, moons, black holes. Let's watch that clip again. Listen for some other words related to space and space travel.
We want there to be Martians with spaceships, ET, flying saucers, UFOs. We want all of these things.
We heard Martians, spaceships, ET, flying saucers, and UFOs. ET stands for extraterrestrial, another name for creatures from space. UFOs stands for unidentified flying objects, things from outer space that fly through the sky. They can also be called flying saucers. You'll notice that in the story, the term UFOs is pronounced UFOs. We usually say UFO. That's all for Study English today. Let's quickly review the topics we've looked at. First, we talked about using the determiners some and any. We learned which one to use and how to use stress to change meaning. Then we talked about how to increase your vocabulary by learning groups of words. Today we looked at space words. Don't forget to visit our website. You'll find more tips and exercises to help you improve your English skills. It's at abcasiapacific.com/study English. And I'll see you next time for more. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English IELTS Preparation. Today we're taking a look at tenses. We'll focus on the present perfect and simple past tenses, and we'll hear examples of each. Then we'll practice using some adverbs of time. The clip we're looking at today is about greenhouse gases. Scientists have been measuring the concentration of certain gases stored in ice in Antarctica. Let's find out more.
The air archived in ice helps prove how much the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has changed in just the last 200 years.
What we found out is that indeed there were much lower concentrations pre-industrially, around about a third of the methane concentration that we have presently. We've seen a big increase in carbon dioxide, so the two main greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have increased. Well, if we look back 500,000 years ago, we don't see concentrations anything like we have presently. We can link those high concentrations of present day uniquely to activities of man, combustion of fossil fuels, clearing of lands and so on, agricultural activities.
As you know, there is a variety of verb tenses in English: simple, perfect, and continuous. Tenses are used to describe past, present, and future actions. Sometimes we need to give more information about when an action happened, how long it happened for, and whether it is continuing. When an action has been completed, we use the present perfect tense. Listen to Dr. Etheridge use it here.
What we found out is that indeed there were much lower concentrations pre-industrially, around about a third of the methane concentration that we have presently. We've seen a big increase in carbon dioxide, so the two main greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have increased.
Dr. Etheridge uses the present perfect tense. He says, "We've found out." He's talking about an action that has been completed. He also says, "We've seen," and greenhouse gases have increased. These actions started sometime in the past, but have now been completed. They are in the present perfect tense. When an action has only recently been completed, we can highlight this by using the adverb just. Listen to the reporter.
The air archived in ice helps prove how much the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has changed in just the last 200 years.
She says that the level of greenhouse gases has changed in just the last 200 years. By using the word just, she is telling us that 200 years isn't very long in geological time. It's only just happened. She's also using the present perfect tense. Let's have a look at how we structure the present perfect tense. We use the auxiliary verb to have and a past participle. So here's our auxiliary verb, to have. I have, you have, she has, we have, they have, and then a past participle. For example, changed, found out, seen, increased, or helped. So we have, I have changed, you have found out, she has seen, we have increased, they have helped. Now let's take a look at the simple past tense. We use the simple past tense when an action occurs at a particular time in the past. For example, last Christmas, or on the 15th of May, or in 1979, or 3 million years ago. Let's listen to Dr. Etheridge.
What we found out is that indeed there were much lower concentrations pre-industrially, around about a third of the methane concentration that we have presently.
He says that there were much lower concentrations pre-industrially. This refers to a particular time in the past, that is, pre-industrially, or before the Industrial Revolution in Europe. The atmosphere was cleaner then because there weren't industries producing greenhouse gases and other pollution. So the simple past tense describes an action that occurred at a specific time in the past. But the present perfect tense describes an action that has been completed at some indefinite time in the past. We've already seen how the reporter uses the adverb just. Just is an adverb of time. There are several adverbs of time. They can be used with the present perfect tense to give a number of different meanings. Listen again.
The air archived in ice helps prove how much the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has changed in just the last 200 years.
The reporter uses the adverb just. When you are using the present perfect to talk about a recently completed action, you can use the adverbs just, already, yet, or still. For example, the level has changed in just 200 years. The Earth's atmosphere has already been destroyed. The adverbs of time, yet, and still are used in question forms and negative constructions. For example, have you finished your assignment yet? No, I am still writing the introduction. Or, have you finished your assignment yet? No, I haven't written the introduction yet. When we're using the present perfect tense to talk about an action that took place at some indefinite time in the past, we can use the adverbs of time ever and never. Ever is often used in questions. It means, has the thing been done at any time in the past? Some examples are, have you ever been to China? No, I've never been there. Finally, when we're talking about an action that took place at a point in the past, up to and including now, we can use the adverbs of time for, from, and since. For example, I have been at this school for 3 months since March. So you can see that there are different adverbs of time for different uses of the present perfect. The present perfect is a difficult tense to learn. It's used in statements about actions that began in the past and are still true now. But it can take a lot of practice to get right. Using adverbs of time can be useful because they help to clarify the precise use of the tense. Practice using adverbs of time and you'll find making the right choice becomes much easier. And that's all for Study English today. Let's review what we've done. We've looked at the simple past tense and the present perfect tense. And then we talked about using adverbs of time in these present perfect constructions. Don't forget that you'll find more on these topics on our website. It's at abcasiapacific.com/study English. You'll find all the Study English stories, transcripts, study notes and much more. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English, IELTS preparation. Today we're going to look at the use of contractions in spoken English. A contraction is like a short form in speech. I've just used 3 examples. I'm for I am, we're for we are, and I've for I have. English speakers often use contractions, so mastering them will help your speech improve. Our story today is about tourists helping scientists study whale sharks off the coast of Western Australia. Listen to this conversation and try to identify the contractions.
So what sort of information are you recording in your log?
The latitude and longitude, the depth, the time, the sex, and any sort of interaction that the swimmers have with it. The whale sharks don't actually seem to mind the interaction with them, and certainly if it wasn't for them being out here, we wouldn't have the amount of knowledge we do about them.
The difference is, I suppose, with scientific research, you might have a research team here for a week, 2 weeks, and then they leave. They might come here once every few years. But when you've got, well, 6 or 7 whale shark boats here and 3 or 4 in Coral Bay running for 3 or 4 months, then their contribution to research is awesome. They're out here every day.
Did you hear the contractions? The first speaker used 3 of them. Simon said, don't, wasn't, and wouldn't. Listen again.
The whale sharks don't actually seem to mind the interaction with them, and certainly if it wasn't for them being out here, we wouldn't have the amount of knowledge we do about them.
Don't is a contraction of do not. Wasn't is a contraction of was not. Wouldn't is a contraction of would not. These are all examples of a very common style of contraction, a verb and the negative not. Now listen to a tour guide, Steve Gibson, talking about the tourists who help study the whale sharks. He uses another type of contraction. Can you identify it?
The difference is, I suppose, with scientific research, you might have a research team here for a week, 2 weeks, and then they leave. They might come here once every few years. But when you've got, well, 6 or 7 whale shark boats here and 3 or 4 in Coral Bay running for 3 or 4 months, then their contribution to research is awesome. They're out here every day.
Steve says, you've got and they're out. These are contractions of pronouns with the verbs to have and to be. You've is a contraction of you have. There is a contraction of they are. We can also make contractions with nouns and other words. Let's look at a few. My brother's studying. Brothers is a contraction of brother is. Who's going out tonight? Whose is a contraction of who is. There's our bus. Theirs is a contraction of there is. When writing informally, for example in notes or postcards, it's fine to use contractions because they represent spoken language. However, if you are writing formally, do not use contractions. Remember that in formal writing, words that are not in the dictionary should not be used. Finally, let's consider the pronunciation of contractions. Some are stressed and others are not. But just remember, the rules for stressing words can change according to context. Here's a guide. Contractions are stressed when they're formed from nouns, main verbs, and negatives. For example, my brother's studying. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have. Contractions are not stressed when they're formed from pronouns and auxiliary words. For example, Steve says, when you've got boats here, they're out here every day. Notice that contractions cannot occur at the end of a sentence except for the contraction of a verb and not. For example, he's sick. Yes, I know he is. We cannot say, yes, I know he's, But we can say, I'm hurt. No, you aren't. Okay, now we're going to watch the story again. This time, listen for the use of nouns.
So what sort of information are you recording in your log?
The latitude and longitude, the depth, the time, the sex, and any sort of interaction that the swimmers have with it. The whale sharks don't actually seem to mind the interaction with them, and certainly if it wasn't for them being out here, we wouldn't have the amount of knowledge we do about them.
The difference is, I suppose, with scientific research, you might have a research team here for a week, 2 weeks, and then they leave. They might come here once every few years. But when you've got, well, 6 or 7 whale shark boats here and 3 or 4 in Coral Bay running for 3 or 4 months, then their contribution to research is awesome. They're out here every day.
All the speakers use a number of nouns. In English, nouns are either countable or uncountable. That is, we can either count them or we can't. Let's look at countable nouns. Countable nouns are generally things like people, a teacher, a cook, a swimmer. Animals, a dog, a cat, a whale shark. Plants, a lily, a bush, a tree. Objects, a chair, a table, a boat. Units of measurement, a litre, a dollar, a cup. Uncountable nouns are generally more abstract and include things such as languages, Chinese, Japanese, German. Emotions, happiness, sadness, anger. Ideas, intelligence, luck, knowledge. Substances or materials like air, oil or rice. Countable nouns have 2 forms. They can be singular or plural. But uncountable nouns have only 1 form and cannot form a plural. Let's have a look at that. Chair can be singular or plural. Chairs. It is a specific concrete thing, so it is a countable noun. We can say, I would like to buy 3 chairs. However, furniture is an abstract noun. It has only 1 form and cannot be made into a plural. It is an uncountable noun. We can say, I would like to buy all that furniture. Using a word like all indicates quantity or amount. Listen to how Simon Stevens measures knowledge in this clip.
The whale sharks don't actually seem to mind the interaction with them, and certainly if it wasn't for them being out here, we wouldn't have the amount of knowledge we do about them.
He says, an amount of knowledge. Knowledge is an uncountable noun. It can't be counted. We haven't got a specific number we can apply to define a quantity of knowledge. We use quantity words or measure words with uncountable nouns instead of numbers. We say an amount of knowledge, a cup of tea, a loaf of bread, a degree of happiness, a measure of luck, or a gust of wind. Okay, so today we've looked at different types of contractions and how they are stressed in phrases. And we looked at countable and uncountable nouns. If you would like to watch today's story again, look at some study notes or do some exercises, you can go to our website anytime. It's at abcasiapacific.com/study English. That's all for today. I'll see you next time on Study English. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English, IELTS preparation. On Study English today, we'll talk about the language of speculation and take a look at identifying the future tense. Speculating about the future is a very important language skill for the IELTS speaking test. But first, let's watch today's story. We'll visit a mangrove forest where we'll meet one of the more interesting animals that calls the forest home, the goanna, and a new animal, the cane toad, that might be threatening the mangrove goanna.
Possibly because it's very hard to get into mangroves all year round, especially in the wet season when there's a lot of water. This site's one of the only spots where you can get in without a boat all year round, so that's why we chose it.
Are cane toads likely to come into mangrove mudflats like this?
It's probable that they'll come in small numbers, but from radio tracking these goannas, it looks like the mangrove goannas will head out onto the floodplain, and they do seem to eat frogs, so it's possible that when the cane toads arrive here on the floodplain in big numbers, the goannas will eat them. That's possibly there will be an impact. We expect that most of the goannas are going to eat a cane toad and die, but we're just hoping that some of them, even a small proportion, won't be interested in eating a toad, and they're the ones that will be living to pass on their genes and hopefully bring numbers of goannas back up eventually.
So the scientists aren't sure what will happen in the future. When we're trying to predict the future or speculate about what might happen, we have several language choices. Let's put together a list of our options. First, we have verbs. We could use verbs like guess, suppose, imagine, think, suspect, or hope. Second, we can use modal verbs. For example, may, will, would, might, or could. Or we can use conditionals like if. For example, if I pass the exam, I will buy myself a new DVD. Other conditionals use similar constructions like this: if I might, or if I could. We might also use discourse markers to speculate about the future. Some examples are perhaps, maybe, hopefully, possibly, or even you never know. And finally, we can use adjectives. It's likely that, it's unlikely that, or it's possible that. So here's our list of choices. We can talk about the future using verbs, modal verbs, conditionals, discourse markers, or adjectives. Now let's hear some of these in practice. Listen to James Smith talking about what might happen to the cane toads and goannas.
It's probable that they'll come in small numbers, but from radio tracking these goannas, it looks like the mangrove goannas will head out onto the floodplain, and they do seem to eat frogs, so it's possible that when the cane toads arrive here on the floodplain in big numbers, the goannas will eat them. That's possibly there will be an impact.
He says it looks like the mangrove goannas will head out. When discussing the future, there are many verbs we can use. For example, it looks like, it seems, I expect, I hope, I imagine, or I suspect. These verbs are followed by future tense constructions. In our example, James says, it looks like the mangrove goannas will head out. He uses the future tense, will, to say what the goannas will do in the future. Let's hear more from James.
We expect that most of the goannas are going to eat a cane toad and die, but we're just hoping that some of them, even a small proportion, won't be interested in eating a toad, and they're the ones that will be living to pass on their genes and hopefully bring numbers of goannas back up eventually.
James says, we expect that most of the goannas are going to eat a cane toad. Expect is the verb, and are going to eat uses the future tense to predict what will happen. James also uses discourse markers. He says that if goannas don't eat toads, then this will hopefully bring numbers of goannas back up. Discourse markers like hopefully, maybe, possibly, or probably can all be used to speculate about the future. They can also give us an idea about what the speaker thinks. James hopes the goannas will survive. The final item on our list was adjectives. Listen to how James uses adjectives to speculate about the future.
It's probable that they'll come in small numbers, but from radio tracking these goannas, it looks like the mangrove goannas will head out onto the floodplain, and they do seem to eat frogs, so it's possible that when the cane toads arrive here on the floodplain in big numbers, the goannas will eat them. So it's possible there will be an impact.
James says it's probable and it's possible. These are examples of using adjectives to show that the speaker is talking about something that might happen in the future. James is speculating about things that might happen. In English, we can also say it's likely. So we can have it's probable the cane toads will come, it's possible the cane toads will come, or it's likely the cane toads will come. In each of these cases, we use the future tense, will come. In English, we have to decide which tense to use when referring to things that might happen in the future. English uses 3 verb forms when referring to future actions: the simple future, the present continuous, and the future continuous. We can use the simple future, that's will plus a verb, there will be. We can also use 2 forms of the present continuous, either the auxiliary verb to be plus the present participle, or the auxiliary verb going to with a main verb. Finally, we can use the future continuous, will plus the auxiliary verb to be plus the present participle. Listen for the future tenses in this clip.
We expect that most of the goannas are going to eat a cane toad and die, but we're just hoping that some of them, even a small proportion, won't be interested in eating a toad, and they're the ones that will be living to pass on their genes and hopefully bring numbers of goannas back up eventually.
There were 3 examples in that clip: are going to, won't be, and will be. Did you hear them? Listen again.
We expect that most of the goannas are going to eat a cane toad and die, but we're just hoping that some of them, even a small proportion, won't be interested in eating a toad, and they're the ones that will be living to pass on their genes and hopefully bring numbers of goannas back up eventually.
He says some cane toads will be living to pass on their genes. Will be living uses the future continuous tense. He also says are going to eat. That uses the present continuous tense. The present continuous tense is used to describe actions in the immediate future that are definite or planned. A good example of the present continuous tense is, what are you doing tonight? I'm going to see a film. And that's all for Study English today. Let's take a look back at the things we've talked about. First, we looked at the language of speculation, the language you use to talk about things that might happen in the future. We saw examples of verbs, modal verbs, conditionals, discourse markers, and adjectives. Then we looked at examples of future tenses, the simple future tense, the present continuous tense, and the future continuous tense. And if sometime in the future you need some help with your English, why not visit our Study English website? You will probably find everything you need. And that's all for today. I'll see you next time for more Study English. Bye-bye. I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English, IELTS preparation. Today we're going to talk about expressing attitude and using the words so and such. And we're going to find out about some nasty creatures called cane toads and all the trouble they can cause. Curious? Let's watch the clip.
You can see these large glands he's got behind his eyes, which contain a lot of toxin. It's got various compounds in there, but basically what it does is give you a heart attack. The toxin's actually all throughout the skin, but the main concentration is in these glands. So yeah, so basically something bites it, if it gets into its bloodstream, there's a good chance it'll be killed very quickly, yeah.
We found a dead freshwater crocodile, which was apparently killed. Certainly one death adder, which is a venomous snake, quite an important Australian snake. We found one of those freshly dead with a small toad in its mouth. And even to small children, if a child was to put them in their mouth, you know, the toxin is quite severe. The flip side of that is that there's a whole lot of animals which will be outcompeted by cane toads. So there are other animals which eat insects, for instance, because cane toads are so numerous that they suck up all the insects from the biota like big vacuum cleaners. And so they can actually cause other animals to starve.
Why are we literally sitting back and watching the cane toad invasion move further and further up through Kakadu and through the Northern Territory?
Well, there has actually been quite a lot done. In fact, over a period of perhaps 10 years prior to this, a huge amount of effort and money has already been spent on looking at some way and means of controlling cane toads. All that work has come to nothing, and most people understand that now. What we have to do is wait on the big guns in Canberra with their genetic engineering and biological control work. That's the only hope there is.
Cane toads are such prolific breeders. Each female will produce 50,000 eggs. There will be millions of cane toads out there.
Unfortunately, cane toads are a big environmental problem in Australia. They're a species that was introduced from another country. We'll use their story to talk about attitude, or more specifically, attitude markers. Attitude markers can indicate the attitude of someone to what they are saying or what others have said. I just used one. I said, unfortunately, cane toads are a big environmental problem. The word unfortunately indicates my attitude to cane toads. Other words that are attitude markers include actually, in fact, certainly, of course, really, and surprisingly. Let's listen to a wildlife ranger, Greg Miles, answering a reporter's question. Listen for attitude markers.
Why are we literally sitting back and watching the cane toad invasion move further and further up through Kakadu and through the Northern Territory?
Well, there has actually been quite a lot done. In fact, over a period of perhaps 10 years prior to this, a huge amount of effort and money has already been spent on looking at some way and means of controlling cane toads.
Greg Miles says there has actually been quite a lot done, in fact. He uses the attitude markers actually and in fact to show that he disagrees with the reporter and to advance his own view. It's a polite way of expressing an opposing opinion. Other examples of words and phrases that are used to do this include, as a matter of fact, to tell the truth, or, well. Let's see some examples. Cane toads look harmless, but as a matter of fact, they're dangerous. I thought you liked cane toads. Well, I don't. Can you hear the attitude expressed in these phrases? Now here's ecologist James Smith again.
You can see these large glands he's got behind his eyes, which contain a lot of toxin. The toxin's actually all throughout the skin, but the main concentration is in these glands.
James uses actually here to introduce details. Because the details of the toxins are surprising in nature and perhaps unexpected, actually provides this subtlety of meaning. Now here's Greg Miles again. He uses two other attitude markers.
We found a dead freshwater crocodile, which was apparently killed. Certainly one death adder, which is a venomous snake, quite an important Australian snake. We found one of those freshly dead with a small toad in its mouth.
He says apparently and certainly. He says the crocodile was apparently killed. He uses apparently because he got his information from someone else and he's not certain that it's true. Based on appearances, it looks like the crocodile was killed by the cane toad. Greg says certainly one death adder was found dead. Here, Greg is emphasising that there's no doubt that this is true, that the death adder was killed by the toxins in the cane toad. From the use of these attitude markers, we can tell that he's not completely sure the crocodile was killed by a cane toad, but he's definitely sure the death adder was killed by one. Okay, let's turn our attention to another way you can express subtleties of meaning in English. They're correlative subordinating conjunctions. The words themselves are short and simple. So, that, and such, that. Listen to Greg Miles talking about the number of cane toads eating insects.
The flip side of that is that there's a whole lot of animals which will be outcompeted by cane toads. So there are other animals which eat insects, for instance, because cane toads are so numerous that they suck up all the insects from the biota like big vacuum cleaners.
Greg says cane toads are so numerous that they suck up all the insects from the biota. This means that cane toads are numerous enough to suck up all the insects from the biota. There are enough of them to do that. So that is called an amount construction. It expresses a meaning similar to enough, which means an adequate number or amount. But this construction also adds a meaning of result using the that clause. Let's study a sentence to see how this construction works. Cane toads are numerous. How numerous? So numerous. With what result? That they suck up all the insects from the biota. Cane toads are so numerous that they suck up all the insects from the biota. The sentence uses the amount structure so that to define an amount and a result. Here's another example. Have you seen the film Cane Toads? The film was so good that we went to see it twice. So tells us how good the film was. That tells us the result. We went to see it twice. Let's listen to how Professor Madsen expresses amount in relation to cane toads.
Cane toads are such prolific breeders. Each female will produce 50,000 eggs. There will be millions of cane toads out there.
He uses another construction to express the amount. He says such. Cane toads are such prolific breeders. He adds the result clause, there will be millions of them, but without using the word that. That is sometimes omitted in informal English. It is understood without being stated. More formally, he would have said, cane toads are such prolific breeders that there will be millions of them. So and such in these constructions also provide emotive emphasis. For example, cane toads are so ugly. Cane toads are such a pest. So today we've looked at attitude markers and language for expressing emotion. We've also talked about the degree or amount constructions so and such. Using these language features will make your language more interesting and will show an appreciation of subtleties of meaning. And it's time for me to go, but you'll find today's story and a lot more on our Study English website. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Hello, I'm Margot Politis. Welcome to Study English, IELTS Preparation. Today we're going to talk about tenses and different ways of making comparisons. Choosing the best tense for formal writing, including your IELTS essay, is important, and so is being consistent. We're going to start by listening to an ecologist talking about termites in tropical Australia. What verb tense does she use?
So this is another species of termite that we have here in the Territory, and this species is Nasutotermes graveolus, and as you can tell it nests in trees, and their nests are nice and round around the higher branches of the tree, and then they build these little runways, what we call carton runways, that run all the way from the nest all the way down to the base of the tree. And the idea here is the termites just use them as shelter, so they're not exposed to predators and not exposed to the hot sun. So they travel down through these tunnels, and that allows them to access food resources on the ground. So here in tropical Australia, termites are actually the major decomposer insect, and they also play a really important role in conditioning the soil, much like earthworms do. So they help to turn over the soil to create new soil and to increase the porosity of the soil.
She says termites are the major decomposer insect. They play a really important role. They help to turn over the soil. She uses the simple present tense form of verbs are, play and help. In IELTS writing tasks, the essay topics given are general and will require you to write about actions. The simple present tense would be the most appropriate verb form to use because you would be talking about general facts. Dr. Dawes Gramudsky was describing general facts about termites, so she used the simple present. Listen again.
So here in tropical Australia, termites are actually the major decomposer insect, and they also play a really important role in conditioning the soil, much like earthworms do. So they help to turn over the soil.
She starts using the present tense and then continues with it throughout her description. It's very important to be consistent in the verb tense you use. So when writing your IELTS essay, try to use the simple present tense for the main verb and avoid switching tenses. Keeping in mind that the essay will be about things in general, you also need to consider the language of the noun phrases. Here's Tracy talking about the nesting habits of termites. What noun forms does she use?
The idea here is the termites just use them as shelter, so they're not exposed to predators and not exposed to the hot sun. So they travel down through these tunnels, and that allows them to access food resources on the ground.
Most of the noun phrases she uses are plural. Termites, predators, tunnels, and food resources. She uses the plural for termites because she is talking about the species as a whole. The idea here is about the habits of termites in general, so the plural would be used. It is not only one predator or a single tunnel or one food resource that's being discussed, but all the predators, tunnels, and food resources of the termites. In formal writing, you will usually find nouns are in plural form when the statements are general ones about groups, classes or things. But of course you'll need to watch for uncountable nouns because uncountable nouns do not have a plural form. The various topics you may get in the IELTS test will be general in nature and will require you to discuss, explain, compare and contrast in general terms. So for your IELTS essay, you should use the simple present tense as the main verb form and use plural nouns or uncountable nouns for your subjects. Now let's look at another aspect of the termite story, how comparisons are structured in English. We use a comparative to compare one person, thing or action with another. For example, Judy is younger than her sister. We can use a double comparative when we want to say something is changing. For example, they are getting better and better since starting the IELTS program. There is another way we can use a comparative to describe complementary processes. That is, we can describe how something is changing, but changing together with something else. We can use this kind of form. In Australia, the farther south you go, the cooler the winters. Now watch Tracy talk about the rate at which termites break down mulch.
The more termites and the more other bugs you have in the soil, the quicker this mulch is going to decompose, and that means the faster the nutrients are going to cycle through the system and help make it healthier.
She says, the more termites and the more other bugs you have, the quicker this mulch is going to decompose and the faster the nutrients are going to cycle. She is comparing several things that are changing together. Let's see how the basic structure of a comparative expression like this works. The form is the plus the comparative plus the subject plus the verb. Tracy said, the quicker this mulch is going to decompose. Then, using exactly the same grammatical structure, she added the complementary statement. The faster the nutrients are going to cycle. Notice the symmetry of these statements. It makes it easier to remember and apply. Let's try another example. The older she gets, the happier she is. The older she gets, the happier she is. And another one. The harder I study, the more I learn. The harder I study, the more I learn. As with most languages, English users take shortcuts. For example, if someone asked me how I take my tea, I might say, the stronger, the better. The stronger my tea is, the better it will be. When the subject is understood in this context, you only need to state the comparison, leaving out the subject and verb. How would you like your haircut? The longer, the better. This is short for the longer my hair is, the better it will be. The short form is common with phrases ending in the better. When is your friend coming over? The sooner, the better. Do you like hot soup? The hotter, the better. It's also used to describe a good party, one that has lots of people. You might say, the more, the merrier. It's understood that you mean the more people there are, the merrier the party will be. These phrases are examples of more complex comparative structures. Why not practice them with your friends? The sooner, the better. That's all for today. Let's review what we've learnt. We've talked about the IELTS essay task and using the simple present tense and plural nouns. Then we talked about making different kinds of comparisons, ones that described complementary processes. And don't forget that you can watch the story again and get more IELTS help when you visit our Study English website. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.